Now let's go to the Lost Baby poem by Lucille Clifton. Again, pause the video and read this poem out loud to yourself if you would. So again, it's clear that we have a poem where the parent narrator is speaking to the child. This is an elegy. It really doesn't have a particular defined repeated form, but we do have three stanzas and lots of wordplay and lots of sound, detail, and visual imagery that occurs in the poem. Some of those images include references to water, at least two references to water, if not three. The idea of sewage flowing into the sea, and then the water is flowing under the city but also rushing back. We'll get back to that in a minute. We also have a reference to winter, the reference to disconnected gas, no car, the thin Genesee Hill into the Canada wind, so we have a sense of place. Um, you also have an appeal to the sense of touch and feel with the wind blowing hard. Um, waters and rushing appeals to sound, as does the reference to wind. And then, of course, the visual imagery. You've got this terrible image of the baby's body slipping like ice into a stranger's hands and then falling naked as snow into winter. So, as I mentioned, many appeals to the five senses there. There's also lots of double entendre or dual interpretation to these images. So, at the surface, you've got a reference to the waters that are flowing under the city. That could be a river, but it's actually the sewage. And this is a literal reference to the fact that the mother has aborted her baby. It sounds as if the baby has been flushed into the sewage system, which, of course, is a terrible, uh, horrifying image to contemplate. The child's body, entering in along with the sewage. So, very disturbing imagery here. Also, double entendre coming though with the waters are rushing back. That's also a reference to when a mother expectant mother's waters are breaking and the child is about to be born. Um, and then the idea of the waters rushing back, coming back to the mother after the fact. So, obviously, all of these images work together to create a feeling of deep sorrow, tremendous regret at the choice that the mother has made. And the fact that the speaker uses such disturbing imagery, the sewage, the drowning, stranger's hand, the body being naked and falling and dropping the body. Um, there's a lot of kind of, I would say, self flagellation, recrimination going on. The speaker is not shying away from telling herself the very hard and painful truth about what her unborn child, experienced, and the fact that she's the source of that journey for her child. So I'm just underlining some of the lines that emphasize this deep sorrow and regret. And then you have this mother speaker musing at the end of the second stanza, if you were here, I could tell you these and some other things. So there's this lament, this acknowledgement that the child is dead, that the mother cannot tell the child these things. But yet, this is in some ways a turning point in the poem, even though it ends this second stanza, which kind of has a new line of thought. I'll talk about that in a minute. There's this turning point in the poem that if the child were alive, the child might actually have some understanding or some appreciation of the choice that the mother made. Also, though, there's the idea of the death of the child's soul and the death of, in some ways, the mother's soul at having to make this decision, particularly in the lines that say, what did I know about the waters rushing back? What did I know about drowning? The child being drowned, perhaps, but also the mother being drowned. So there's this kind of conflagration between the child's death and the mother's death. And in some ways, one soul dying, but perhaps part of the mother's soul dying as well. So I talked about three sections to the poem. The first stanza of the poem is really a description of what did happen to the child. So this is a memory. Interestingly, that line, the fourth and fifth lines of the first stanza, what did I know about waters rushing back? What did I know? That should remind you of Robert Hayden's poem, Those Winter Sundays, who's also looking back on a past experience and realizing, the speaker realizes there were things about that experience when I went through it at the time that I did not understand. So there's been some time that has passed between when this event occurred and when the speaker is reflecting back on it. If you happen to see the video of Lucille Clifton reading the poem, that might give you even a little bit more insight into the poem and into those lines. So that first stanza is really, rooted in the past, reflecting on the memory of this experience of aborting her child. Then that second stanza really gives an explanation. I don't know that it's functioning as a justification. I'm certainly not arguing that anyone should accept this as a justification, but there is an effort on the speaker's part to explain the logical, perhaps, reasons for her choice. The explanation goes along the lines of the season in which the child would have been born. The mother is obviously living in circumstances of poverty. They not only have disconnected gas, so no heat in the home, but disconnected gas during the winter, which means that the home would be very cold, unbearably cold, perhaps even cause the child to die. There's no transportation, so they would have had to walk to put the child up for adoption over a hill into the Canada wind, which is also obviously a bitterly cold wind. And then the mother would have had to give the child up for adoption. The child would have fallen naked as snow into winter, so it's a picture of a child moving into circumstances that really do not look promising, coming into the world empty-handed, and also going into the world into the hands of someone who is a stranger, someone that the mother does not know, someone that the mother does not trust. So, although these may not be acceptable explanations or understandable explanations, the focus of the stanza does seem to be kind of projecting into the future, hypothetically, about what would have happened if the mother would have kept the child. So there does seem to be some attempt to come to an acceptance of the decision, perhaps if for nothing else than to just be able to move forward into life. And that moving forward is very important because it's very clear in the last stanza that the mother has additional children that she needs to care for. So there's this resolution at the end of the poem that the mother doesn't want to be anything less than a mountain for the brothers and sisters who are definite, in other words, who do exist. And the mother kind of, calls a curse down upon her, saying, if I'm anything less than the strongest of mothers, let the rivers pour over my head, let the sea take me for a spiller of seas. So she's kind of calling down her own death and demise upon herself if she doesn't live up to her own expectations of being a strong mother. There's also this kind of racial reference, let black men call me stranger always. I think that the idea of a black woman getting an abortion during this time frame is just laden with the racial and systemic inequities that continue to exist, but that were certainly intense during the time in which this poem was written. I think it was written in the 70s, perhaps the 80s. So in many ways, people of color, women of color, were in catch-22 situation. If they kept the child, they would be bringing a child into a terrible situation. If they abort the child, they're going to be condemned, for making that decision. And even by their own people, what she's saying is, if I don't live up to my own goal of being the best mother I can be for the child that I've kept, then let even my own people call me a stranger to my own race, not just now, but always. And she invokes that curse upon herself for the sake of her own child, the child that was never named. So you get this kind of vow that comes at the end of the poem, a resolution, and again, this tragic last line, always for your never named sake. So the speaker again ends with an acknowledgement of really the terrible act that she committed and the sorrow that she has, the regret that she has, the remorse that she has over that decision. And she uses that as kind of the impetus to make a vow for the future. And if she's going to make for a vow for the future, that indicates that she does have hope for the future, even though she is fully aware of this terrible decision that she's made and really will never be able to outlive the regret and the self recrimination that she feels for it. Her circumstances almost require her to have hope. If she doesn't have hope for the future, there's no way that she can live up to this resolution that she's made to herself to continue mothering the children that do come into this world. So the mother really at the end refuses to give just one interpretation of her actions. She does see her actions as reprehensible, I think, yet also uses them as the foundation to move forward into being the person that she wants to be for her children. And so this poem again, raises that question of what is true. Um, is it true that she made a bad decision to take the life of her own child, or was this an act of care on the mother's part to help her child avoid having what the mother believed would be a terrible, um, really an existence that the mother could be and might be blamed for in the end? Or is the truth that the mother made an awful decision and, should only view herself as wholly evil and reprehensible?